got a whole pile of questions to answer, but let me start by asking it whether there are any questions from the floor before we go to the written ones. So anyone got a question they want to have answered?
Yes, I've got one, but you don't have to do it straight away today. But I meant to email you, but I haven't managed to.
Yep, that's great.
How do I know how much a tree is worth?
Oh, Peter.
So you don't have to answer it now.
No, it's a good question. Look, there's been attempts, and
I hope there's a fair bit to it as well. So I'm not sure that.
Okay, so there's an MIS that deals with this. There's also the Council of Landscape Tree Appraisals guide to doing it, and the method that's used from that most commonly is the trunk area method, and it does make some sense if you think about it. So trunk diameter, trunk area, all has some physical relationship to the whole mass of the tree. And I know some of you heard me talk about this before, this thing called allometry, where you can measure one part and get an idea of the whole. So their philosophy works on this way, but it's the system that I think has the most in terms of looking at how society values it. Let's just say you had a nice Japanese maple and it had a trunk area, which you can calculate out pi r squared, a trunk area of, say, 1,000 square millimeters. It's not that big. That's, you can work it back out the other way, but 1,000 square centimeters of area. And we said, look, what's the biggest we can buy? Well, Rob's down in Victoria. There's some really good old nurseries down in Victoria. You might be able to find one down there in a 2,000 litre. You might have at one stage found one in a 2,000 litre bag. So let's just say you can, or you head up to, somewhere like Civic Trees. They used to have some in their storage, or somewhere like that. And you find one of these big old trees, Japanese maples, in a 1,000 litre bag, let's say. And we measure the trunk there, and it's, works out that it's got 100 square millimeters, and they want $5,000 for that tree. Well, that means that each square millimeter is worth $50. Now, my big tree then, which has got 1,000, means that that's worth $50,000. Does it make sense? Work out the unit price per square centimeter for the biggest available tree of that size. Someone values that tree.
But let's say I've got two of these trees, Mark, and they're kind of similar, not dissimilar. One's in my front yard, and you can see it from all up and down the street. The other one's in a bushland, and you have to get right up close to it before you can even notice it.
Okay, so then this is where it gets really complex, and I often talk about it with phoenix palms. We sell phoenix palms. Let's say a 6-meter phoenix palm installed worth $8,500. 5,000 or 6,000 to supply and a couple of thousand to put in the ground. But that very same phoenix palm, oddly enough, somebody else is getting rid of. That's how you get them. So somebody values it enough to want to pay for it, and someone values it low enough to want to get rid of it. And that's a real anomaly with valuations. So, Peter, there's lots of things.
I've got a tree in my backyard here, and when my cat died, I planted the tree over the top of it. And if that tree was ever to die, my wife would be horrified.
Yeah, look, and so trees can have sentimental value beyond their actual material value. And we see that, for example, with a car. It was my very first car that I bought. The car gets written off. It's only worth what the market is willing to pay. The nice thing about the trunk value method, it's talking about what the market is willing to pay. Now, the tree in your front yard that's really obvious, and the tree in the bushland that's not so obvious, we're now talking about different values of things. The one in the bushland gives that value to the community. The one in your yard gives the value to you. The community may see it, but the community aren't paying for it. So it's a different thing. And one of the things that Peter, you'll have experienced already is that a lot of people don't value trees at all. For example, and I've talked about this, I know before, okay, And Niels is not the best driver. He's looking at trees. He runs through the front yard. He hits a nice little Japanese maple and knocks it over. Awfully sorry about that. No fences are damaged, just the tree. No harm, no foul. On the way to getting his car out, the tow truck hits the telegraph pole, the just communications pole. No wires except the telecommunications wire. Well, that's reported by the police, and you'll get a bill. It's going to come through the mail, and it's going to be about $2,500 or $3,000 to come in and replace that pole. That pole has value, but to the police and the insurance industry, trees almost never have value. So we've got this uncertainty in society. And in most cases, our insurance policies don't think about it. Now, when someone else damages my car, I don't have to have car insurance to have their insurer fix it. So the question becomes then, Peter, who's paying for it? If it's the householder, he's probably not going to be able to make a claim of insurance if he's had the damage. A storm came through, blew over my maple tree. It's in my yard. My insurance company says, well, that's tough luck. You clean it up. That's a different deal than Niels driving through my front yard and hitting the same tree.
Okay, so here's another one. I know you know the answer to this one. So I've got a tree on the street, and it's a really nice tree. It gives lots of shade, and it's got value to the community.
Yes, look, the trees do have value to the community, and that's one thing you can look at. So I'm just here in Auckland, and Auckland's an unusual place. It has a population density twice that of Sydney, which is really quite amazing, twice that of Melbourne. And not only that, but New Zealand Roads Authority puts a value of statistical life for a fossil of 12.5 million. So they value Kiwis twice the value of an Australian. That's great. So Kiwi, yeah, probably a fair judgment, but well, look what they're doing in the America's Cup. We've got to give them more credit. So because we've got this this value that they provide to the community, we could do the same thing again. We could look at the area of the tree's canopy, work out the health values that are coming in. I'm thinking of a jacaranda here in the backyard of where I am. That's probably giving $5,000 worth of health value to the community every year. Well, what would I have to invest at the standard interest rate, say 5% now? We could get 5%, that's a good return. How much would I have to get $5,000 a year? The answer is I'd have to invest $100,000 in health infrastructure to get that benefit. So there's another way you can look at it. So again, there's no, I wish there was just a magic wand that you could wave and say, okay, this is what's going to be accepted. And Peter, I know we've had this discussion before, but another way of looking at it is the accounting format, which is net present value. In other words, okay, so I've got this jacaranda here. It's in the backyard. It's been trimmed and maintained for 30 years. It's got a 50 centimetre diameter trunk. How much is that worth if I put that tree in 40 years ago and paid $100 to plant it and get it established? And then each year the value of that tree went up by just say 3%. What would it be worth? And you can play that game by going $100 times 1.03 times equals, and keep on pressing it for every year. And you'll see quickly enough, it goes up in value. And so that's literally what you've foregone. Rob, you put that tree in, you paid the $100. That $100 today, working at inflation at 5%, is worth whatever it might be. And I'll do a quick one, and I think I can share my screen, Peter. I'm hoping that works. Could I present, Peter? Will it let me?
Do I have to do anything?
I think last time we did, but yep, you have to let me share. And I don't know that you can let me do it on this format. So look, you understand what I'm saying. Just put in the dollar value with your calculator now. Grab a mobile phone. I'll do it on a mobile phone. So well, let's say this tree's 40 years old. I've paid $100 for it when I planted it, 40 years ago. 100, calculator, not phone. 100 times 1 point, we're going to give 5%, 0.5 equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 36, 37, 38. I've missed a few. It's about $500 worth. Not a lot. But there's a real thing. Rob has lost that amount of money. Had Rob just put that money in the bank account, he would have got that money back. And so that's the net present value method. What was that $100 today? What would that be worth in 40 years' time? Because that's what I'm going to wait. And then you can use a combination of those things. The dilemma with all of these things is we're trying to value something that in most cases is attached to the land, that you can't just readily and easily just separate it and go down the road and grab a new one and put it back in, like you can with a fence, like you can with a car, like you can with a new roof. So it does make it difficult.
It is quite different to a thing like a kilo of tomatoes, which every time there's a storm might double or triple in price.
Yeah. Look, and then, as you say, there's the personalized side to it. How do I feel about it? What's my emotional attachment? And that can make a real difference. So
that's very interesting discussion. Thanks, Mark.
No magical solution. My suggestion is that if you're doing a valuation and it's to do with a legal or insurance cases, be honest about that. Say, look, there are different ways of valuing it, and none of them are going to be accurate or precise, but there are some ways of looking at it. I looked at one, gave a paper on it at the Botanic Gardens in Mount Annan earlier this year, looked at what would it cost to replace the biomass. I can't remember the exact figures, but I know that we're looking at replacing Eucalyptus grandis that was 27 years old with Lagerstroemia natchez, and I think it was about 1,000 odd trees we needed to replace to get the same biomass replaced in 5 years. So if you looked at biomass replacement, it was incredibly expensive, because to go out and buy 1,000 natchez probably cost you $150, $200 each to get them and get them planted. That would be just extreme on the other side, and that's that balancing act. That talk came with the concept of, when the developer says to you, or the householder says to you, if you work for government or if you're dealing with a householder in a discussion, well, all I want to do is cut down the tree and I'll replace it. I'll happily replace it. What are you trying to replace? Tree numbers? Because 1 for 1 doesn't work. Tree species and size. So I'll cut down that Sydney blue gum, but I'm going to plant another 2 Sydney blue gums in case one dies to get one growing up. And in 40 years or 50 years or 60 years, we'll have the same thing. Well, that's not a really good solution in some ways. So again, Peter, there are some really complex issues that are involved with this process of what are we losing.
You did touch on briefly at the beginning of this discussion when you talked about the MIS, but there are a number of systems out there. What do you think about just using one of these systems? So, for example, like Heliwell.
Look, they've all got their advantages and disadvantages. When you start talking about amenity value, in my mind, you start talking about something that's more subjective. If you talk about system services, so we talked about iTree and trying to come up with the value of the tree with iTree, you're talking about what does it do for shading, temperature control, electricity usage, infrastructure maintenance, all those sort of things. That makes more sense intuitively than some arbitrary value. So if you look at the Thayer method, and Peter Thayer and I've had some discussions about this over the years, he says, well, look, I use the system and the value of the tree comes out to be about 50,000, and that seems to be about right. And my response is, about right based on what? How do you figure that out? There isn't an about right. And that's why I like the trunk area formula, and then you can download a copy of that. It's available online. Not the current version, but it's close enough. And Australia and New Zealand don't have that process of already having the value of most of the trees, because there's so many trees that you're not going to have, oh, look, if you want a Eucalyptus grandis, it's this, and if you want a Japanese maple, it's that. Whereas if you look at many of the cities in America, they're probably limited to 10 species as representing 50% of what's sold. So those areas have it all calculated out. But the trunk area method makes sense because society is already saying, I would pay that much for a unit of the tree. And
that means that you have to go and source a nurse.
Biggest you can find, yeah. And that's a pain when you're buying one-offs, Peter. And oftentimes you'll find that it's probably going to be sitting somewhere as a 45 or a 20 litre. But the great thing about a 45 litre tree is that trunk area is usually quite small, and you might only be talking about 3 or 4 square centimetres. And the tree you're talking about is often a lot bigger. So it gives a good multiplier to work that out. Happy with that?
Yeah, that's good. As you say, there's it's very complex, and there's a lot of different ways of looking at it.
Yeah. And any of them is not necessarily wrong. It's just that there's a whole variety of options available. And I think you've got to be honest about the fact that there are the differences and discuss that in your thing. You may choose one and say why you've chosen that, but at least acknowledge that it's a method and that there is no universal method. If you're in America, it would be the CLTA method, and there are series in that. It's like our MIS. There's a series in the MIS that you can use. Canberra has just adopted one, for example, for work on canopy area, and that's fine. City of Sydney has one. City of Melbourne has one. There are a number of different methods. It's easier for a city to do it in the sense that a city says, well, our trees are worth this. It's harder for an individual to do it because an individual can't do that realistically as objectively as a council can. So hopefully that answers that one. Any other questions on without notice? Otherwise, I'll go to emails and go through what I've got coming in. Colin, you've got one. Yeah. Do you want to give me a question? You'll have to go on mic. You're on mute. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So I sent the email in.
That's why I knew you had one.
Photos. Yeah, that's the one I've got. Is the one I emailed in about the palm.
Ask the question so the group can hear.
Okay. So this property would like to take the straps down from the palm tree. I'm not sure what it is.
Maybe moved.
Yeah, it's been transplanted in. Sorry.
Yeah, it was braced, and now they're wanting to get rid of the bracing. How long has the bracing been in?
It's been in for 1 year.
1 year. It's starting to get the stage where it should have settled, or the soil should have settled. It's really interesting. When I moved Phoenix palms, this is a Phoenix palm?
Yeah, I think so.
And how tall? How much of trunk height?
8 meters.
8 meters. So it's a reasonable size.
Yep.
I've got a 6 meter sitting in the yard at home. It's got a bit of a lean on it. We just cut the bottom off it and put it on the ground and left it there, and then put a bit of wrapping around it. It's not even in the ground, and it's stable. So I would say what I would do now is I would loosen those stays off. if you have to put a turnbuckle in to each of them, I don't know whether they're wire or fabric or what they are.
Ratchet straps.
Ratchet straps, okay. Loosen them off, give it some slack, give it another 2 or 3 months just so it's getting some sense of movement. Go around after a big windy storm. If there's no cracking in the ground, take them off completely.
Okay, is there any sort of rules of thumb on how big the root ball should be when you're transplanting them in relation to the height, or?
No, but they're incredibly stable because they've got a lot of static mass, not very much dynamic. There's a very little bit of dynamic mass in the frond moving, but insignificant. So if they're sitting on solid ground, that is, if they're settled in. So when we move, sometimes you don't get the bottoms perfectly flat, or in the case of a tree spade, you're making it conical and you're forcing it into the bottom. But if you're hand digging or machine digging, the bottom's not dead flat, then you're sort of pulling the palm to one side and shoving some soil around and hoping some soil gets underneath, and you rock it and push it and rock it and push it. And eventually it looks like it's okay. And then you're saying, well, I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned that it might blow over. I'd never brace a phoenix, just can't imagine it. But I get the way that people get concerned. And so they put some braces in.
Okay.
And at that point of time, it's just waiting for that soil around to consolidate. Once that soil's consolidated, think about it. For that palm to fail, you'd have to put the soil, push the soil one side in, and the underside you'd have to lift out. So even if you only had a meter by a meter, it's 1 cubic meter. That's a very small root ball for a phoenix palm. You still have to push all the soil on one side out of the way. And so they're just, as I said, they're so heavy, they're static mass. Now, if you're talking about a 1 meter by 1 meter on a 15-meter high Washingtonia, I understand why people get more concerned because the leverage is bigger. But those things just sway. And yes, look, I would say you're well past it. Your soil's settled, you've had some rain. That's usually the worst bit. The first 2 or 3 big rainfalls after you've moved it, where soil settles in, you get some gaps around the root plate, you fill that back up with soil. That's the scary time.
So it's more about the water draining in and the soil sort of settling rather than the root mass sort of growing. What's the sort of, because it's sort of like a fibrous root sort of.
Very, very fibrous. So the inside of the palm root is called a steel, STEEL. It's incredibly strong in tension, massively strong. So
those start growing after a year, or you expect a bit of growth?
They'll have put at least 300 mils or so into the surrounding soils.
Yeah.
But what you had there already was probably sufficient if you could have consolidated it perfectly. If you sat there and put a big vibrator on top and managed to vibrate it and get all the gaps filled up, you could deal with it and just walk away. And a lot of the guys that move trees for that reason run sand as a backfill medium. It creates an interface issue, but it does have that advantage of settling the transplant in very quickly.
Can you
probably lots of watering in to help?
Yeah, water sand. If you use a sandy loam, like a typical turf underlay, 3 parts sand, 1 part loam, and they wash the damn stuff in, it flows. And because it flows, it goes in and fills those things in very quickly. And you'll see that most of the big palms that are moved aren't braced.
Okay.
We did a 15-meter one near the ocean about 2 years ago, and a second one about a year ago. And we just simply tree spaded them in. That tree spade's 2 cubic meters, 4 ton of soil, down to a cone, 1.5 meters deep, and they just sit there like nothing's happened. The trouble is, if you don't get them in exactly at the angle the client wants, is moving them afterwards. It's really hard to get them to shift. So
I can see that one side has been ratchet strapped really tightly because I think they're trying to straighten it up.
Yeah.
I think my advice would be to release the straps, wait for 6 months, go and check on it, check the root ball. If nothing's happening, then release the straps. Something like that.
Release the straps. Go have a look at it after the next really big wet period. Wet period is when you're going to get some movement. So good rainfall, good wind. If there's no movement in the soil, you're finished.
Good, thank you.
Go ahead and remove it.
Nice.
No worries. Next question.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you just did. Would you like to ask a second one?
I would like to ask, I've got a site where they're going to have to remove 3 bungalows. One's 15 meters tall to the crown shaft.
Mm-hmm.
Can you move them and save them?
Yeah, you can move them. If you're talking, can you move them on a site and keep them on the site? Yes. Is somebody interested in the bungalows?
No, I just thought I might approach Alpine Tree Movals to see if they want them.
Yeah, look, someone like Maury is probably your best to ask for it. Either that or Peter Wilds up in Central Coast,
Okay.
or Dave Dooley, although bungalows aren't a really desired species. They're fiddly to move.
Okay.
Okay. So that's not saying they're not a nice palm, but we trash heaps of usable trees. Pretty well anything with a 150 to 250 mil diameter trunk's movable fairly easily. It's just that we don't value them. Same issue as Peter was talking about.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. Thanks, Vicky. Yes, David.
Yeah, hi, Mark. I just wanted to ask in relation to Phoenix canariensis. I've got a client who's got one that was transplanted 18 months, 2 years ago, and it's starting to yellow. And where he's got it from, they talked about applying humate. I've never heard of it. Can you explain what humate? They said humate.
Humates. Okay. So yeah, look, humates are just the end result of degradation of humic materials, humic acids. So mulch is the equivalent, and mulch is the ideal. Older leaves in Phoenix palms do tend to go a little bit more yellow. They tend to drop the magnesium levels down, put into newer leaves because newer leaves are more efficient. And a good palm fertilizer would be something that I'd look at, or a tissue and soil analysis, and based on the two, adjust. The one thing that phoenixes don't like when they're getting established after the transplant is too wet. And you're in Victoria, aren't you, David?
Yeah, Northeast Vic, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that's happened is Victoria's had fusarium brought into it, same with South Australia. And fusarium can be fatal. And in the earlier stages, it looks like very early stages, looks like nutrient deficiency. Then it rapidly changes to a part of one of the fronds turning, usually half of the frond going brown and dying. And when you cut that frond off, you can see brown discolored material on the inside, so typical of a vascular wilt. Is really important when you're working with pretty well anything, but certainly with things that have got these heavily communicable diseases, is to sterilize your equipment.
Yes.
And that's 70% alcohol, 30% water. We'll say it 100 times more. As arborists, we need to get into the habit of realizing we're dealing with living things, and we need a sense of sterility that's fairly similar to that of medicine, to that of veterinary science. I mean, if I went and operated on a dog and I didn't sterilize my equipment, I'd get sued. We regularly go into gardens and dig in people's gardens and use equipment that hasn't been sterilized, and we really need to start upping that in our profession. So I will say it 100 times more. But yes, my response would be, if you wanted to, just a palm or a monocot fertilizer. If you didn't see, remembering the old leaves must start depleting these things. So it may not be anything more than normal growth. What's really important is what your fronds are looking like from about midway up. If they're a good normal green color, then I wouldn't worry.
All right. Right. Thank you.
Okay. And then organic material. I cannot ever tell you how important organic material is in terms of getting soil health right. If the soil health is right, then most of the other things will adjust fairly easily.
Yep. All right. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. No other questions without notice. I'll go to the questions. Peter's probably got them there as well. Let me see how I go with. Yes, Colin Fry's got a question.
Yeah, so you're talking about soil analysis and tissue analysis. I I understand with pH, you know it should be in a particular range, but with plant material and soil analysis, what are you looking at to compare that to? What's the normal range of certain chemicals that are you should be
Okay,
looking
so
at in
a
a
good
plant?
agronomist will have a fair idea of what your ranges are normal for normal plant growth. And they'll do your report up that shows you that quite readily. The reason why we want tissue analysis is there's a difference between what's in the soil and what gets taken up. So if, a perfect example is you've just put down a whole pile of green mulch, your nitrogen levels are going to drop. So your soil might show nitrogen deficiency, but your foliage might show that there's adequate nitrogen. And so what you don't want to do in that situation is go and add nitrogen to overcompensate for a natural process. And that's why I'm saying soil health is really critical. In fact, your whole soil nutrient tables, and you can find these, and if you can't, email Peter and I'll find them, and he'll give them to you on the Dropbox. The availability of nutrients changes from inorganic soils to organic soils. So if you look at a sterile medium, say a sand silt mix is fairly sterile, not completely. That versus an organic mix, which is high in microbes, will change the entire availability. So the microbes start to come into play. And I know we've talked about this before, but for example, phosphates, which are incredibly important for plants. You know, you've got these phospholipid membranes, you've got adenosine triphosphate, the essential energy unit of all life. That phosphate's got to come from somewhere. Where Australia's got low phosphate levels in its soils, thank goodness. But we've got good phosphorus. But plants can't get phosphorus. Fungi can, mycorrhiza fungi can get phosphorus. So if there's phosphorus in the soil but not phosphates, and there's good microbial activity, there could be more than adequate phosphates in the soil because the microbes are doing their job. Does that help explain why we want to know what's happening in the leaf?
Yeah, it does. I'm just my question is are the chemicals quantities or ratios standard across all plant material?
No.
Is that what they're comparing it to?
No, but within similar ranges. Yes, there's a range of things statistically. And can you have aberrants outside of that range? The answer is yes, but they're less common. And a really classic one for aberrants is Brazil nut, for example. Aberrants in the amount of selenium. Why? I don't know. It just is. It's just one of those things that happens. Lots of plants have aberrants in the amount of calcium. Some, and you'll have seen this if you've seen. I'm trying to think, Peter. What's that one that exudes lots of calcium onto its leaf? I'm thinking it's Elaeocarpus reticulata, but I don't think it is. Anyhow, yeah, different plants deal with calcium in different ways, and if that calcium's in the form of calcium oxalates or stored in the vacuole, it's less important than if it's in the tissue. So there are things that do throw that.
Published literature out there.
But when it comes to domestic trees, it drops down. When you're talking about something like phoenix palm, it's not so vague in the literature. There's lots of good literature on Phoenix dactylifera. And whilst it seems like that's not relevant, it is. There's textbook after textbook on true date production. And so that's well researched. It's one you'll find no troubles with. And there are reasonably good books on palms, Tomlinson, Brochette's Guide, Elliot and Jones. So there are a number of good books that give at least some idea. And your agronomists are pretty good at knowing where that stuff is and where to find it. But good question. Excellent. Okay, Peter.
Yes.
Do you want to pull up one of those questions and ask it for me rather than me trying to swip backwards and forwards between 4 screens? I can if you need me to.
I would, but I'm very disorganised today.
That's okay. No, I will.
Something from Nils. Do you have anything, Nils?
Someone I
Yeah,
answered only
hey
half the
guys.
question on.
I don't know if you've answered them already or not on a meeting that I wasn't in, but
Yes, we did answer half of yours, I think, and not the other half. So I'll just pull that up. That's fine.
Impact of tree structure and health on bushfire affected trees. I don't know that we've talked about that.
Yeah,
that
okay.
was years ago. That question. Yeah.
18th of the 3rd this year.
This year.
That's
Well, I sent you some. Well, I can just read them out.
yeah.
Go on,
Anyway.
read me the one that you haven't got the answers to. I'll tell you whether we've got it already in the recording or whether we haven't addressed it. Go for it.
Yeah. So I'm still stuck in the risk assessment, school risk assessment report.
Yeah.
This question is, what are the existing regulations from the Education Department regarding the time frame for school risk assessments? Some schools I work for say that it must be a 12-month cycle. That works great because I use QTRA, but I'd like to inspect trees at different seasons every year, like not.
Yeah, look, I'm just going
October
through this.
every year.
Yeah, going through exactly the same issue, and I'll give you some stories.
Yeah, I don't know whether
That'll
to
help
do it every
illustrate.
10 months or 14 months, but yeah.
Okay, so for us in New South Wales, our health, our schools director said every year. Okay, once every financial year. In Northern Territory, in Darwin, the coroner said every 6 months. Okay, so those are some directives. So obviously got to comply with them. I take once in every school year to be financial year to be once in every financial year. It doesn't have to be the same time in every financial year. And we've been suggesting that the problem of doing it at the same time is it's not best industry practice. Best industry practice from track, QTRA, valid is you should try and look at your trees at different times of the year because there are some ephemeral problems, ephemeral come and go, that you'll only see at some times of the year. One of them is our Latioporus portentosus, for example, a brown rot. I went past the school the other day. I've always suspected it at a different time of the year. The new system came out and they said, this is when we want you to do it. And I'm sitting there seeing this Latioporus. It's probably, a small watermelon in size, and, a couple of grapefruit size. And it was probably only a month old or 2 months old. It'll be gone in another month or two's time. And so I wouldn't get to see that and be able to assess that if I kept on seeing it at the same time every year. And so there are advantages in changing it around. The dilemma you've got is lots of bureaucracy, big organizations like things to be very rigid. So it's just about coaching them. And so we regularly, when we see things like that, we'll say, this is one of the reasons why the industry best practice says that we should be changing the times of the year. And what I'd like to do in that sort of situation is swap things over a couple of months and a couple of months and a couple of months. And you could take them backwards and forwards. And if you're looking after 20 schools or 10 schools or whatever it might be, you should be able to move them around by a couple of months. Not
saves you from doing all of them at the same time as well.
Well, you could do all of them at the same time, but you do it in July this year and in September next year and in May the year after, if that makes sense. Another one of those fungi that cause problems, Armillaria amelia. Armillaria luteobulina, Australian honey fungus. You're only going to see that in sporocarp for about 4 weeks of the year. That's a primary pathogen that can make a tree fall over. And you're asking me to figure out whether it's there or not there. And I'm never there at that time of the year. That's unfair. So.
And you've got the Phallus whatever it's called, the velvet top as well, and
Phaeolus
pine tree.
swartzii.
Phaeolus.
Phaeolus swartzii tends to be a problem on gymnosperms, and fairly limited in its distribution. Hopefully you don't have it up your end of the world at the moment, but certainly near the Botanic Gardens area of Melbourne and near the Botanic Gardens area of Adelaide.
Yeah.
But
Definitely
some of
in
these
Melbourne.
things. Yeah. So, my answer to that is ideally we'd like to do it at other times of the year. At least you can see Phaeolus later on. It sticks around for quite some time. It's usually knocked off by lawnmowers. But you can spot
So
it.
where do you sit with, obviously the QTRA is based on a 12-month cycle for the risk assessment. Where do I sit if I say
not based on a 12-month? No, QTRA is not based on a 12-month cycle. QTRA assesses based on an annual risk. Most risk is assessed annually. Some risk is assessed lifetime. So we're going to build a nuclear power plant. We want to know what the risk of that is over its entire lifetime, not just annually. So an annual risk doesn't necessarily have to be done annually. My feedback to the department when Bridget Wright died, and the feedback of Arb Australia at the time, was that schools should be inspected based on the level of problems that they have or don't have. If you've got a school that's got very few problems, inspecting it every 5 years is probably more than adequate, as long as somebody responsible is having a look around after a storm. That's it. And I was asked the question last year, what's a responsible person? And my answer was, not the person that asked that question. A responsible person is just somebody who says, I'm able to do something. And so I'm asking you to go around and look for broken branches, evidence that trees might have moved in the ground, evidence that trees might have cracked. And I say constantly, I think an 8-year-old can do that. They're the really obvious things. And it's the really obvious things that are going to get us every time. The subtle things, we're going to miss 9 out of 10 times anyhow. You can't spend now looking at each tree up and down with the binoculars, zooming in and zooming out, get out your drone, have a fly around, have a look, now I'm going to have to put a climber up. We just can't do that. So we're looking for the obvious. And what we record down is a lot of stuff that isn't a problem. I record cavities. I don't record codominant stems anymore unless they're actively splitting. I just refuse. Because I could do that on some species. Just every Melaleuca quinquenervia I'd record down codominant stems with included bark. Yeah, okay. And when do they fail? During storms. Most of them don't fail. If they did, you wouldn't see them. So, codominant stems, if I'm using QTRA, I would say, look, codominant stems not actively cracking, you might go down to a 6. Some species you might go down to a 5, and that's about it. And if we go back, I don't know whether the last Arbormentor that we had, Niels, but if you're talking about schools are used 15% of the time, 16%, close enough to 15.
So is that 15% of the whole year, of all the hours in the whole year?
Yeah, of all the hours in the whole year. Where are those kids for that 15%? 80% of the time they're in a classroom. 20% of the time they're outside. Are they all at one spot outside, or are they moving around randomly? If they're moving around randomly, how often are they really under those trees? And then what conditions are they going to fail in? In most cases, most of our failures are going to occur during inclement weather when the use under those trees is close enough to 0. So the whole school risk thing is, unfortunately, in my mind, overdone. But hey, I'm thankful for the extra money. And guys, just keep paying your taxes, and the government will keep blowing it and sending some of it my way. Thanks. It's just the sad truth of it.
Yeah.
And again, Niels, if you ever want to come up and spend a couple of days, if you want to spend a couple of days with me out in the field, seeing how I do a risk assessment, more than happy for you to come out and walk around with me and ask me, why haven't you recorded that? And why haven't you recorded this? And the answer is most of it's just irrelevant.
That'd be good. I think I definitely put too much down.
Yeah,
and
look,
I'm pretty average at determining the occupation rate as well. Like it's easy if it's
occupation rate is a little harder to do, but it just takes some thinking. So with schools, all I did was say, well, let's say that students are at school for 7 hours in a day, times 200 days in the year, that's 40 weeks. So that's 1,400. 1,400 divided by the number of hours in the year, and you can figure it out at the drop of a hat. And then I know they're not outside most of the time, so I'm saying 20% of the time they're outside. So that's a reasonable amount of time in a week. And then I know they're not outside during severe stormy weather. I think we've finally communicated successfully to almost every school that inclement weather is not when you let them out. And you know what? They'd already figured that out before anyone had even died, because you let and who here can I ask? Any of you got had a boy between the ages of about 5 and 12? Stormy weather, they are uncontrollable. I don't know what it is, but they become hyper. Is that right, David? Yeah. So schools have figured that out. You don't let the boys out in that weather, because you'll have it difficult to control them. And schools regularly, in places I go, will be, I'm being out there inspecting the tree. The wind's blowing. They're saying, oh, it's a bit, if you know what I'm saying, I'm going to go inspect the trees, but yeah, fine for you to keep the kids in the classroom. Normal winds the tree's well and truly used to. If the tree has been exposed to the wind each year, every year, 50, 60, 70 kilometre hour wind, it'll usually be adjusted to that. What we worry about is the abnormal, when it starts going, it hasn't had a gust like that for 2 or 3 years. Now I start to worry, because you'll find that the difference between those winds is a reasonable amount. It's not just a kilometre or two. It's 10 and 15 kilometres. Happy with that? So perfect inspections, ad hoc, once a year. If it turned out to 15 months, I don't think anyone's negligence.
Yeah.
What we do know, and I've talked about this before, the regulations between states vary slightly, but the Work Health and Safety Act, Victoria wanted to be different, as it normally does. The rest of the states, as far as I know, introduced uniform legislation. But the Work Health and Safety Act says that we should make sure that our workplaces, and a school's a workplace, because teachers and students are exposed to risk. A workplace should manage risk to the level that it's reasonably practicable and as low as reasonably possible. So, where it's tolerable and as low as reasonably practicable, or it's broadly acceptable. That's what the Act says.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is get it there. Now, I compare that with driving. I'm allowed to drive at work. Well, yeah, and so you should be looking for a car that has some basic safety features and so on. But that mortality rate in driving is 1 in 20,000. That risk from trees is 1 in 5 million. That risk of beds is 1 in 420,000. There seems to be something wrong there. And it's because trees are big, they scare people. It's purely emotional. As I said to you before, my wife occasionally falls out of a bed. Now, I hope that's the way she dies, because it'll be a great story to tell for the rest of my life. But in the process, I look out the window and there's never the Channel 9 or Channel 7 team there saying, hey, we're at the Hartley's place. Boy, it was a close call last night. Mrs. Hartley fell out of the bed, but fortunately she didn't die. But when a tree falls over and absolutely nothing's damaged, the news crew's there saying, big tree fell on XYZ Street. And that just has such a strong influence on society. If you go back 60 years, you didn't have that. For a start, the news would have never have lowered itself to broadcast that. Secondly of all, it wasn't broadcast live from the site. It was all just red and small little clips that they put together, and they wouldn't have wasted their time on such trivia. And 3/4 of us didn't have televisions. Nowadays, everyone's getting it streamed, and it's really influencing the way that society responds. So society significantly overestimates lots of risks. And Rob, you get that little poo stick thing. I get that little poo stick thing. Vicky, you get it now. We're on that age. We worry about that. We get to 74 and the government says, well, you might as well die. Don't worry about it anymore. We're not going to send it to you. And most people over the age of 74 don't go out and buy it. Because again, they just say, well, the risk of me getting it now is pretty low. It's only about 1 in 40 or 1 in 50. I've only got a few more years to live. It doesn't matter. So we don't figure out these risks well. And we saw COVID do that. Melbourne locked down like nothing else. My mother's nursing home has only just recently stopped COVID testing. And I would say to the nurses at the nursing station when I get the COVID test, you're not testing me for influenza A or influenza B. No. Do you know that the mortality rate for influenza A and B is twice that of COVID? Why are you not testing me for influenza? And it's just how they were thinking. People overreact emotionally all the time. And one of the things that arborists do, unfortunately, I'm not saying you, but arborists as a total profession, is they freak people out about trees. That tree's dangerous. Oh, I wouldn't want that over my house. Oh, that, my very first class in a diploma class was having my teacher say to me, I wouldn't want a lemon-scented gum or a spot of gum over my house. And my first response was, why not? I'd want one over my house. I've got one over my house.
Yeah, you've got one.
Yeah, like, why would you worry about that? People panic about this because we're taught to. Colin Fry said he implanted one next to his. I think he meant he planted one. But yeah, look, it's the way we deal with things. I'm over here in New Zealand spending some time with a great friend and arborist, Gary Claxton, and Gary was just reminiscing at dinner time. He said, all the eucalypts have been cut down in New Zealand because they've got this reputation of dropping branches and being dangerous. Well, now they've found out they've got rid of the eucalypts, that other trees drop branches. Fancy that. And I said to Gary, let's look at the data. The death rate in the UK from trees is 1 in 8 million. They don't have any eucalypts. But it's lower. You're smart. You guys are smart. Very quickly, it's lower in England. 1 in 8 million, smaller than 1 in 5 million. Yes, but Australians spend more time recreating. And so 80% of our deaths occur during inclement weather with people outside, driving, holidaying, in caravans, in tents. They don't do as much recreating in England for some reason. I don't know what it is, but apparently for 3 to 6 months of the year, it's crap. So there's your difference.
I think our forest fire management contribute a fair bit to those numbers as well, being out in the fires in the bush. I hear a lot of stories of cars and people getting crushed.
Yeah, look, fire-based deaths we took out of the database, and you'll see that in the paper and in the database we separated them as well.
Even if a tree fell over.
Yeah,
I guess that was
during the fire.
Yeah,
trees lose tissue very rapidly in fire, and we don't know whether that's going to happen. So if I said to you, "Look, Niels, you tell me which tree is going to burn the next fire," okay, and I'll park my car beside it because my car's insured for more than it's worth. The only way that the insurance company is going to believe that was accidental is not. They're going to know you deliberately lit it. Okay, it's just you don't know which tree is going to go, and so we've just got to eliminate that because we just can't know where the fire's going to go, what tree's going to burn, what tree's going to fall, and when it's going to fall. Risk assessment is not about prediction. Risk assessment is about determining the range of risk. You happy with that?
Yeah. Did you see the photo I sent as well of Eucalyptus viminalis that had completely rotted out the whole inside and failed.
I don't know that I did see that. Niels, let me just see.
Anyway, it's like a 30-year-old viminalis, and it failed. And then afterwards, I saw the whole inside is just white rot. There's hardly any sapwood or livewood on the outside whatsoever.
Yeah, and look, that's what we're looking for, and you're looking for indicia that might be the case, and you're not always going to get to see it. The other thing, of course, as that diameter gets bigger, and so 30 years old, it's not that old. It's probably about 60 to 80 centimeters through.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting near that threshold again where the thickness starts to become worth less. But again, I've seen
so many of them out here with very little, but this one was like, it looked like the bark was holding it together.
Yeah, and again, you may or may not get something that makes you want to go and tap. When you tap a tree like that with your hammer, it sounds like a bass drum.
Yeah.
But to tap, there's got to be something that makes you pull that hammer out of your holster. If you're going around and hitting every tree, there's just no rationale behind that.
Yeah.
Happy with that?
Well, I just assumed that was Felinus, because we've got a lot of that here.
Felinus or Ganoderma.
I haven't seen it that extent of rot in a trunk before. I didn't think it would. The way it was looking, I would assume some of the sapwood was even, rotted out, which is weird.
Was there an opening anywhere?
Oh, there would have been. The tree was all split apart. I could hardly tell what it was anymore.
There could have even been an old fire there. I don't know. So I'll have a look for that one and have a look. Colin, you said you're off. Thanks for being with us. We're not going to be too much longer. Let me just pull up the last couple of questions and see if I can knock a couple more out.
Thanks, Mike.
No, welcome. As I said, tree risk assessment has become a major sector. I mean, there's a specialist tree risk assessment company sold a few years ago for millions. That gives you the nature of how the market's changing. If I go back to 30 years ago, risk assessment was never talked about. It was just a non-existent thing. So it's a really weird change in things. So someone sent a question here. It's Colin. He's just gone, unfortunately. A client has asked me to determine if it's safe to remove cabling. Yes, we did answer that. Sorry. And it was a 1.7 meter root ball from the center of the trunk. If Colin happens to hear this, he can go back and remove that brace straight away. There's more weight down below, so that you can always calculate your weight of your things. So Colin, you are there, still great. 1.7 meter radius on the things, that's 3.4 meters across on an 8 meter tree.
That's pretty.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So 3.4 meters, 1.7 meters radius, using a meter deep. I'm going to assume, I say 600 deep.
Yeah.
So it's 1.7 times 1.7 times 3.142 times 0.6 times 2 is equal to, there's 10 ton of soil, okay, and about 6 ton of dirt. The center of gravity is below ground.
Oh yeah, gotcha.
Take the ratchets off tomorrow. Okay, I should have read more detail on that. Sorry, Colin.
I just wanted to get the right thinking on it, because I don't have experience with bombs down here. So
if you were to put that on the ground and push it with a bobcat, you'll have troubles pushing it over.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so now you've got soil around it. You've got no
watered in and a year.
Yeah. No, it's that person was overly precautious, way. And I think, as you said, probably they were just not wanting it to shift anymore from where it was, wanting to keep it the way it was.
Yeah, I think they said it was 10 ton when they moved it. So that would be about right, I think. Is that possible?
That'd be smaller than that then.
I think they said they had to get 2 cranes in to move it.
Yeah, look, so your wood on the Phoenix is going to weigh a little bit more than a ton per cubic meter. You can again work out the volume of the trunk, and if you've got 8 meters of trunk, you need to add about 4 meters of frond, and the frond weight, if it's full, is almost the same weight as the trunk weight. Now we take about half the frond mass off when we prune them, so you can take the last 4 meters and halve it. So add 2 meters on, so it's a 10 meter equivalent to a 10 meter solid trunk.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so you can work the weight out on that. There's probably I will do it for you now.
Pi r squared times height.
3 times 0.3. There's actually a calculator we have for it. Times 3.142 times. It's about 340 kilograms a meter. So it's about 3 ton of trunk. 3.7 ton of dirt. So yeah, your center of gravity is still below the surface of the ground. So you'd have to lift it up. You'd have to get in there with some forks on your big muscly 5-ton bobcat and start to lift it to rotate. And you've got to get the head and half the trunk past the center point. And someone in the group will be smart enough to work that out and calculate out. But the answer is you need a bigger bobcat. Okay. At that point of time, it'll become unstable.
Yeah.
You've got so much margin on your side, you're fine. So that answers Colin's one in more detail. I apologize for that, guys. Next one. I did have one that somebody answered. I answered, and I only answered half of. And I just wanted to get that. Yeah, okay, Niels, I see your one that's failed, and yes, I think that's probably Pholinus, whatever it is. Now, Peter's asked a question that came through, and it came through in response to that Pholinus species that we found a few months ago, and it looks like that is actually now a new species. They've done further DNA testing, and fungi are into the dividing stage. That is, there's groups that people that like to clump them together, and there are people that like to split them apart. And on that particular fungus, it looks like it's going to be a new species described in Australia. Peter asks, how do you find something new like that? And the answer is you start to get familiar with what you're seeing. And then when you see something you don't know, then you want to be asking the question, what is it? So, Peropsides calypso, I think Peter had come out a year or two before you and I met. We saw it outside a museum and said, hang on a second, something's not right. This is not something we're used to seeing. And so then there's a Chris Miller, a expert in the museum in Sydney. This was at the Macleay Museum that we saw it. And pretty quickly we said, yep, okay, we know what it is now. So anytime you see something that you sit there and think, I've not seen this before, that's when you start to ask questions. And this is a great forum to do that on. This is where, you're now getting collective 20 people or 30 people, and you can start saying, I haven't seen this before. There are also forums that deal with these things. And it's the same with plants. It's interesting. One of our species of species of Alocasuarina was found on the foreshores of Sydney. I can't remember. It's one of the old heritage public houses. A Botanic Garden staff person was going home in an afternoon, saw it and said, I can't identify that Alocasuarina. Another one out just down the road from me, about 10 years before I moved into the area, someone was walking through and said, what's this species of Alocasuarina? And same thing, Alocasuarina glaricola in that one, to do with it growing in gravel environments. And sure enough, I moved into the area about 10 years later, walking through the same vegetation association, and said, oh, hell, what the hell is this species of casuarina? That could have changed 10 years before, and I could have been there 10 years afterwards. He could have been coming through. So as arborists, I suspect the time is not too far away for an arborist amongst Australian arborists to find a new species of tree. You see something you haven't seen before, you just say, what the hell? When I was teaching at TAFE at Richmond, one of the young horticulturists there, Colin, came across a new species of Thismia. He wasn't a Thismia expert. He was just walking along and said, what the heck is this? And that was the start of it. So be curious. And today we've got tools like Google Lens and things like that that really do help bring some of that closer to us. So hopefully that answers that question. Peter, does that satisfy?
Yeah, I think so, Mark. A bit foggy today. You'll have to excuse.
Yeah, it's okay. So just have an insatiable curiosity. And for goodness sakes, use your cameras. Nothing like taking a photograph. First of all, it tells you where it was that you've seen it. And then it pops up, and then you ask yourself that question. And I've got things that I've taken a photograph of around the world where I couldn't identify it. And I've gone back, a year or 2 years later and thought, in fact, I just saw one today out with Gary, and I said, I remember seeing this one tree in a school grounds in 2011, and I couldn't identify it for almost 2 years until I walked down my driveway one day and saw a pittosporum flower and thought, the flower is that of a pittosporum. It's got a beautiful burgundy flower on this one. Never seen it before. It's commonly used as a landscape tree over here, and it just all fell together. Record stuff, collect stuff. Don't feel bad about, if you're at a client's place and you see a disease that you're not familiar with, about taking a sample and putting it in a container. If you're not sure what it is and you want to preserve it, freezers are wonderful places to preserve most of your insects and things like that. Put them in the freezer in a container, let them take the lid off, let them dehydrate. They'll dehydrate over time. If you've got really nice elaborate stuff, then there's specialized machines you can go and get yourself, or kill chambers, and you can go and read on how to preserve insect specimens or fungal specimens and those sort of things. If you're Sydney based, we play with it all at work, and you're welcome to come around and play. Love preserving fungi, love preserving insects, and we have a massive big machine for it called a lyophilizer or a freeze dryer. Specialized equipment in doing it. Okay, guys, any other questions before we say the night's over? Yes, David?
I've got a client who's decided he wants to transplant a heap of olive trees. Are they just a weed? Like, can you do anything to them? From what I've seen online,
basically, you got to remember that the brown side goes down,
yeah,
and the green side doesn't matter. Okay, they are amazingly tolerant, and if you go to Greece or to Italy, Europe, you'll see 400,000 or 500,000-year-old specimens moved with root balls 2-to-1 ratio. They'll be cut back, and typically olives were cut back anyhow. So the bigger they are, the more you've got to cut them back to get anywhere. But yeah, what they don't like is really wet feet. Okay, so they don't like getting boggy, like good drainage. And the other thing they don't like is getting a lot of insect problems. There's an insect and a fungus that's causing problems. So peacock fungi or peacock spot, and then olive lace bug. Olive lace bug is a native hemiptera, so it's sap-sucking insect to Australia, and it's causing real problems in the olive industry. It does knock the trees around, and you need to keep on top of that. But if you're happy to manage the olive lace bug, pyrethrum, for example, you're in Melbourne, aren't you, David?
Yeah, Northeast Vic. Yeah,
you can treat anything. Yeah, it's Melbourne. Go buy any chemical you like and nuke them. If you're going to pickle the fruit, then you want to use a pyrethrum-based spray. If you're not going to pickle the fruit, then a pyrethroid or a neonicotinoid will work perfectly fine.
Yep. There's no correlation between trunk diameter and root ball size, like you were saying. I've seen some videos where they've just really.
Yeah, they're incredibly tolerant, and it's a part of that issue, David. It's interesting. We're comfortable doing that to olive because people have done to olives for centuries, but you can do it with lots of other trees. It's commonplace to cut those sort of ratios in most trees in Asia. But we won't do it in Australia because we're worried. It's commonly done in Hawaii with many of their species. Again, no troubles at all. We won't do it in Australia. And I suspect that you could probably do it with 50% of what we have in Australia. I certainly know that things like callistemon and melaleuca, you can just treat them like olive.
Okay.
We just haven't got to that love affair for our own plant material yet, which is really a shame. Oddly enough, if you go overseas, you'll see Australian plant material being moved. Very different. My first tree farm that I went to in California was probably 75% Australian native. It was just a weird experience. Yes, Vicky.
I just wanted to ask about for multiporia. Is that the fungus that Phylinus robusta it's branching off, or is it totally different fungi?
Sorry, what was the fungus you said?
It's called for multiporia robusta.
Don't know, but yes, I think it is. But that's the New Zealand fungus, if I read correctly. So, Phylinus robusta, we said was Australian. It's not. So, as I understand it at the moment, and this is all DNA stuff because taxonomically they're difficult to tell. The argument is now that what we have is Phylinus badius.
Okay.
And my comment and my recommendation on that, and it's been on some of the other things, is because we're so uncertain, we should probably just use Phylinus sp rather than trying to specify the species. The mycology has really gone through a strange change in the last 30 years. 30 years ago, it was morphologically done, the shape and the size of the spore and all sorts of things. But if you isolate out things to an area, they behave differently. And you've all seen that with trees, so you can understand it. Because the features are so subtle, the spore size is not a really reliable thing any more than the leaf size is a reliable thing. Eucalyptus teraticornis can be from a broader leaf to a narrow leaf, from a more erect-looking tree to a more weeping-looking tree. And so now it's gone to DNA, and it makes it so difficult for us as practitioners to deal with it.
Okay.
And these punk-like looking things, these woody things, good luck on it. I suspect that there's probably another 20 or 30 species we have never even identified because they look similar at a bigger scale, but that's where it stops. So I suspect that as DNA identification of sporocarps becomes a more normal, and it's not an expensive process, it's under $200. So I think, by the time we've done a few thousand of those in Australia on the East Coast, we'll have a better idea of the sort of things. I know there's a species that attacks casuarinas. I know there's a species that does something else. And whilst I'm at it, if you're in Sydney, which you are, Vicky, be interesting to see if it's elsewhere. There's a shot-hole borer that's affecting Pittosporum undulatum. Worthwhile keeping an eye out for it. The DPI is after some specimens for DNA analysis. So I suspect that it's only a matter of time before we import it down to Victoria, unless there's an alert done before then. So we want to try and identify it and have the alert done before it spreads. And there is an exotic shot-hole borer from that's been introduced to Western Australia, polyphagous shot-hole borer, and we're all on tenderfoot on the East Coast, worrying about when it's going to hit. Notice I said when. I don't think there's any questions that it will, and you'll see it in maples, you'll see it in poplars, liquid ambers, things that don't produce a lot of extractives into their heartwood, and it's really going to change again now. Your autumn glory in Victoria is on its way out. If it gets over, it's gone, which is a real shame, so keep your eyes open for that. If you see you want to isolate it as quickly as possible. Guys,
what's the main identifying feature for the polyphagous shot-hole borer?
Needles. I'm going to tell you to go to the internet and look it up. But
Sounds
very
good.
small, uniform hole, about 1.5 millimeters in diameter, round, tunnels inside. Definitely go look it up. They've got some great images.
Yep.
Get familiar with it. Keep your eyes open. It will come over almost certainly on transport on a truck. It'll be one female, impregnated and ready to lay.
Thank you very much.
No worries, guys. I'll
Thank
catch
you.
you with the next one. Peter knows when that is. I don't, unfortunately. Have a good one. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So.